am a born and raised.
We are
born and raised. Okay. Born and raised here in Texas, and have been really active with advocacy at the level of the Texas Medical Association. Lots of scope of practice fight that we've been dealing with the last couple of years. And in pediatrics, we actually a couple of weeks ago were granted the blessing of an email from the ADP that stated that they had listened to pediatricians and we're going to change our MOC points, basically going from 20 and 20 for Mach 4 to some sort of a 25-25 system, since apparently as pediatricians, we have difficulty putting the math together. I think may have been the motivation for that. I'm not exactly sure, but it's really hard to upset a group of pediatricians, and they did very successfully accomplish that. I just checked, a petition was actually then put together in regards to asking pediatricians, what do they really feel about the MOC process, particularly Part 4? Because most of us could not figure out what the American Board of Pediatrics was really referencing in terms of we listened. And they managed to get about 4,000, I just checked, 4,000 plus signatures on this petition to essentially eliminate the MOC Part 4 completely from our board certification process. And I was lucky enough to have my email, which was very, with a diplomatic way of saying it, very forward in terms of how I felt about what was going on. And I did get a chance to speak with the VP of credentialing for the Board of Pediatrics. There are some of y'all that are giants in terms of what you have been doing in the last 10, 15 years fighting these systems. So I feel like a novice in this, but I definitely can tell you after that conversation with the VP of credentialing, we just don't have a voice. We don't have a lot of power in the situation. And to me, the whole entire situation feels wrong. I think that many of us have just had our heads down and we've been working and doing the work and taking care of children. And particularly in pediatrics, we don't like to confront. We don't really like to pick a fight. We want to spend our time in the rooms with kids, with families. But I think this is something that has to really be addressed now. And I know many of you have already been working on this. So I've just been honored to be in the presence and to have the advice of many of you. Marion, I know I was on emails, Dr. Matthew, yesterday I spoke with you. I mean, it's just been amazing to me and eye-opening how much the system is working against us. And how much we really have to do to kind of get together and start fighting back so we can get back to being able to take power with our relationships with our patients. That's it. I think most of us went to medical school for that reason. We want to take care of people. And there's a lot of people now who are profiting off of our work, off of our just naivety at some level, that we trust people would make good decisions. But anyways, the petition has 4,000 plus signatures. I think we've woken up a sleeping giant to some extent, because I just didn't realize pediatricians would get so mad, but we are actually finally raging against the machine. And I really look forward to today's discussion, you know, kind of to get more information on what else is out there now. So thank you all so much for having me.
That was a fantastic introduction. Thank you. I am going to see, is Dr. Cartazina here? She wasn't sure if she could make it. She's actually the pediatrician who wrote the petition that just like, boom, lit on fire. You know, and yes, Dr. Stockton, the pediatrician, was the architect of MOC, as Wes is pointing out in the chat. He was actually the chairman of my department where I trained at Robert Lurie in Chicago before I got there. I'm going to allow Wes to say something about the practicing, Wes, co-founder of Practicing Physicians of America, to say something about the efforts of PPA and our lawsuit, and then we're going to have Paul take this away. Before we start, I know I can mute everyone, and I have someone who's graciously, Christina Dewey's offered to be a co-host to help allow people in, although Christina, people can join the meeting. But I can't figure out how to make anyone a co-host if they need it. So someone type that into the message for me. And then without further ado, Dr. Wes Fisher, a mentor of mine and the co-founder of Practicing Physicians of America, to give a very brief update.
Thanks, Marion. I'll try and be very short and sweet to you guys. Basically, PPA sponsored many of the plaintiffs who were involved. We are not members of the suit. You have to have people who have grievances to be able to file suits against people. So, but there were a number of doctors who've been harmed by the maintenance of certification process. Many of the lawsuits, actually 2 of the 3 lawsuits are still ongoing. For those of you who want to help support the plaintiffs in our efforts, we do have a GoFundMe page that you guys can click on and contribute to, and any amount is greatly appreciated. We should know that as of February 16th, the American Board of Radiology was sued by a radiologist, and that it was decided after the ABIM ruling. Many changes occurred in the lawsuits, and they were amended, and new cases came through the appellate court level that actually helped our case somewhat. And so they opted to appeal the ABR case before the final ruling actually came down. So it now goes for oral arguments the 16th of February before the 7th District Court in Chicago. That's where ABR is located. There's also another lawsuit, which is the American Board of Psych and Neurology. A group of psychiatrists sued that organization, and they also are awaiting the verdict. But I suspect that the judge in that case is going to wait until she hears how the appellate court rules in the ABR case, because the 2 lawsuits are very similar. We'll get more information after the 16th of February. At least these are all public oral hearings. You can log on. I'll try and post the link on either our website or my blog, the Dr. West blog, so that people can tune if you'd like to hear the arguments. But these are very legal-esque arguments, and they may or may not be worth your time. The big issue is what we're trying to do is just have our day in court as physicians. Unfortunately, the prior rulings, the big thing is the tie of maintenance of certification to original certification. And they claim that original certification and our need for mock is voluntary. I think most of us realize now we can't get it on insurance panels, can't get hospital privileges, can't get malpractice insurance unless you're board certified. So it's an economic necessity for physicians today. And because of that tie between maintenance certification and your original board certification, that's where the lawsuits are targeting. And we believe there are 2 separate products. One is how that you are capable of learning from your residency, the other being a continuing education product. They are not the same. And that's what the lawsuit's trying to show, and how economically this has benefited the boards tremendously, as you know from the fees that you have to pay every time you sign up for these things. So stay tuned. Hopefully more information will be coming soon. So thanks, Marion.
Of course. And if we don't have Dr. Katarzyna here, I mean, if I don't think I saw her here. I didn't know she wanted to say anything because she's the person who started. Can I ask you to mute, please? I haven't found the button that allows me to mute everyone, so.
I'm glad the pediatricians brought a patient to advocate for this as well.
We never mind that, really, truly. People always have heard my kids in the background. People can mute upon entry. I've been looking for the button to tell me where to mute everyone when they come in, and I can't find it. I thought I
We could probably have this whole meeting with the baby in the background, and the pediatricians would totally be fine with that. we can zone it out.
All right. Well, I don't think we have Dr. Katarzyna here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Harvard Professor of Neurology, Dr. Paul Matthew, who's going to give us a fabulous presentation. Enjoy. I'll mute myself now. If people have questions in the chat. I already asked Dr. Matthew, it was okay if I give him a little interrupt if there's a great question that comes up that's salient to his points.
Yeah. Can you guys hear me and can you see my slides?
Yes and yes.
Okay, thank you for that verbal response. So I have about 1,000 slides, so I'm going to go pretty quickly through them. So as Marion said, Paul Matthew, I'm an assistant professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School. Let's see here. So this is the alternative introduction slide for my presentation. As Marion said, there might be some attempts at humor riddled into this presentation. I do that primarily to keep everyone's attention, but also not to make this too depressing. So here are some irrelevant financial disclosures. They have nothing to do with board certification or my role at NBPAS. And here's a little intro here. I promise to pay all my fees and do all my MOC modules. Please don't decapitate me or my reimbursement. Not even a prior authorization can save you now. For the record, there's no anesthesia or copay required for this procedure. So as I mentioned, a non-financial disclosure, I'm the Director of Legislative Affairs for the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. This is a voluntary position, so I do not make any salary or any other financial perks other than occasional travel expenses and speaking honoraria on occasion, but really nothing in the 6 or 7 figures that you'll see among the American Board of Medical Specialties. So we're going to talk about the rationale for continuing medical education, list some of the causes and mitigation strategies for physician burnout, and state some of the requirements for some of the different options in board recertification. So take this as some food for thought or a reason to take a stand. My guess is most of you on this call are looking for a reason to take a stand, and hopefully this will motivate you in that regard. So just some quick history. The American Board of Medical Specialties were created by us. It was by physicians and physician societies because they wanted to establish a standard for which we can call people specialists in the different medical specialties that are offered. As all of you know, over time, specialties grew and more boards emerged. So even within the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, these are all the different neurology subspecialty offerings offered by the ABPN. And I'm sure all of you on this call within your boards, there's multiple subspecialties that are offered by your ABMS boards. And then very quickly, many of you know the ACCME is the organization that basically accredits CME. It's there to ensure that CME activities are independent, free of commercial bias, based on valid content. And there's really a lot of good evidence suggesting that CME does improve competence and does improve patient care. And interestingly enough, not all states require CME for licensure. I was very surprised to learn this. But yeah, there are states that require as much as 50 credits per year, 25 credits per year, and some that require none. So just to look at the timeline for board certification, as many of you know, before 1994, if you were board certified, it was a lifetime certificate. It was a celebrated rite of passage. And then after 1994 is when the decision was made that that's not adequate, and every 10 years you needed to take a certification exam. It was $2,000 plus the travel and time off and all these things. And of course, this was in addition to CME. And most of us grumbled about it, saying, oh, what a pain, but it's once every 10 years, I'll just suck it up and do it if that's what I have to do. Even back then, it was hypocritical to hold grandfather diplomates to a different standard than the younger physicians. And I'll get into this a little bit more on an upcoming slide. And of course, the irony of people that are further out from training, who you may think are further out of touch with current practice, were the ones that were being absolved from not having to do anything in addition to their initial certification. So I'm grandfather, just asked my grandson. Yeah, Grandpa, who needs MOC when you have Pexasteel? So grandfathering is actually a really racist term with a horrible history. The 15th Amendment prohibited racial discrimination in voting. So in the 1870s, numerous states, particularly those in the South, enacted these voting requirements in order to limit African Americans from voting. So these included literacy tests, poll taxes, and constitutional quizzes. Unfortunately, this backfired, and many poor Southern whites could actually not meet these requirements. And that's when the grandfather clause was born, where basically if you had ever voted in an election before, you were grandfathered in and able to vote again, or if you were the lineal descendant of someone who has ever voted, once again, you'd have the ability to vote. So grandfathering in regards to board certification, the older docs who grandfathered in, when I studied some of the data, are approximately 80% white and 70% male. So although nobody drew these lines or arbitrary dates with racial or racist intentions, unfortunately, that's the way it panned out, which really grants this group of physicians an unjustified elite status and requires younger physicians, primarily women and minorities, to be subjected to MOC compliance. So MOC, as we know it, was born in 2007. In addition to the examination of the CME, there were these self-assessment modules and these practice improvement modules. And although this is no longer on any of the websites, this was a quote from one of the ABMS websites. The change from recertification to MOC strengthened the program and guaranteed that physicians were current in ways not immediately available for testing. As many of you know, the word guaranteed is not thrown around loosely in medicine, but clearly the ABMS thought this was an appropriate use of it on the website at that time. So for the Trekkies out here, here's Captain Kirk. Can you handle this, Bones? Damn it, Jim, Starfleet terminated my contract because I did not buy my MOC modules on time. Hashtag real broke McCoy. So this is kind of how things go. And as you know, we tend to speak more and more in emojis. So the grandfathered physicians were happy. The not grandfathered physicians were sad, which then saddened the grandfathers, which led to anger, even further sadness, fury, and then pumpkin sadness, whatever that is. And, you know, we know that emojis are just supposed to represent the way people feel and how they look, which I believed until this physician came into my office. So physicians have nothing better to do at their time, you know, between patient care, being driven to see more patients in less time for less reimbursement, research, teaching trainees, EHR compliance, CME, ICD-10, institutional compliance modules, and then of course, family and social commitments, not that those really matter. So this thought that, you know, people ask, why are we burned out? I mean, this slide really tells it all. And what irritates me and probably irritates many of you is much of the literature out there about burnout is talking about coping strategies, career counseling, meditation, yoga. I mean, essentially, this is like a hot dog eating contest where we are given all these administrative burdens and all these other burdens that are just required from that last slide. And really the question we should be asking is not mitigation strategies, but how about less hot dogs? How about less of these administrative burdens that really don't benefit us or our patients? So many of you have probably been in this situation. I went to an information session with the ABMS or the ABPN, and they were just rattling off all these requirements and the fees, and you have to go online and log in and do all these different things. And everybody's asking the same questions. Who came up with these modules? Why am I being asked to perform these tasks? With the PIP and the other things, I could just cherry pick patients and colleagues to fill out these surveys and say what a great doctor I am, and what about these costs? And you know, this is not just a group of angry physicians at a single session. A Mayo Clinic study found that there was neither hard evidence nor general consensus that MOC benefited patient care. And less than 15% of patients agreed with the phrase that MOC is worth the time and effort. And I put this very simply as a drug analogy. Really, can you imagine a new drug hitting the market where nobody did any safety studies, nobody did any efficacy studies, and just said, you know, why do we introduce this drug for this disease that's highly prevalent, affecting a large percent of the population? So in this analogy, safety is side effects, which is time, money, burnout, and animosity of the diplomates. Efficacy is a lack of studies that justify the negative effects of MOC. And then the salaried ABMS employees lobbying and publishing are the ones that are also empowered to help craft the policies for these different institutions. So where's the money coming from? So this was a study that was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, and they found that at over a 10-year period, an intern has spent $16,725 to be compliant with MOC over a 10-year cycle. So again, that's direct costs of actually participating, time off from work, travel, prep materials, all these different things. And then a hematologist oncologist spent in the range of $40,495. That's a lot of money. And again, all you ever hear about is the cost of the actual products, but not time off from work and all these other things. And there was an analysis in JAMA that looked at the member boards who generated revenues in the range of 263 million and 239 million in expenses. So a difference of $24 million in surplus. That's after everything's paid out. Examination fees counted for 87%, and officers and employees accounted for 42% of the expenses. And there was a mean growth rate of 10% per year. And a quote from that article, I'm just going to read for you because it's so strong, in my opinion. As nonprofit organizations funded primarily by physician members, the ABMS member boards have a fiduciary responsibility to match revenue and expenditures. However, this is not the case for most boards, with overall revenue greatly exceeding expenditures. So when I read this, I thought this would be a primary care physician or a pediatrician or an internist. Lo and behold, they were two plastic surgery attendings at Vanderbilt. So that really shows you just how far and broad MOC affects physicians in nearly every specialty. Dr. Cutler has a comment here. These onerous programs must come to an end. I'm of course referring to MOC compliance and not having to listen to Dr. Matthews' lecture. Thank you for that, Dr. Cutler. So another painful thing is that hospital systems are now paying for MOC. Now, this is outside of the CME budget that many physicians are given who are on faculty. So one healthcare system, if we do the numbers, if there's 1,200 physicians in that hospital at $2,000 a pop, that's $2.4 million every 10 years, or $240,000 every year. Clearly, this is money coming from some general fund, and that's money that's being diverted away from better causes, such as the opioid crisis, dealing with COVID-19 and other patient-centered activities. And that's not even including money from time off and patients not being seen, and the revenue that's not being generated because physicians are taking time off to comply. Another way to look at this is that there was an analysis, and they found that $5.7 billion in physicians' time and fees will be expensed because of MOC between 2015 and 2025, and 33 million hours over 10 years to fulfill MOC requirements. So that's approximately the equivalent of the total clinical workload of 1,785 physicians over 10 years, or not graduating 8 medical school classes every 10 years. So that should tell you the impact on both patient care and the financial ramifications of MOC. Where else is this money going? So in some of the tax filings of the ABMS, $390,000 were spent on a lobbying firm. And again, this is to try to entrench MOC into what the definition of a physician is, into Obamacare and into some of the physician quality reporting requirements. So that's how aggressively the ABMS is fighting to really make sure that they are the only game in town.
So if
And-
I actually might add, Paul, they're not
Yeah.
only not disclosing their lobbying, they failed to disclose their conflicts of interest. Wes was pointing this out in the chat. So
Yeah.
the president of ABIM at the time, Christine Castle, pulled in, I think, 1.2 million as the president of ABIM, and about 200,000 each for being on the board of Premier, one of the group purchasing organizations. You know, those big corporate entities that you see me like nailing all the time. She was on that board. She was on the board of Kaiser, and she was on the board of the National Quality Health Forum. And there was some unscrupulous activity that you can read about in ProPublica. But the bottom line is when she got caught with her hands with all these conflicts, essentially she spun, resigned from the 3 boards at 200,000, and then painted herself out to be just such a great, wonderful human for keeping the job that earned her 1.2 million.
Right.
Anyway, carry on.
Okay, thank you for that. And then, many of you are probably wondering, well, how about our physician societies? Why aren't they stepping in to intervene here? So as many of you know, many of the physician societies were actually selling the modules that were required to complete MOC. So they were making a tidy little profit. And more recently, a lot of these societies are getting educational grants from the different boards. So here's one I'm just sending as an example. A $100,000 grant from the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology went to the American Academy of Addiction Psychiatry and Educate. And basically this grant is being used to offer discounted self-assessments and MOC modules. So they're getting money, but then they're still selling these modules to complete MOC. So as you can see, it's a mess. And these physician societies who are supposed to be the ones that are looking out for us are actually looking at their bottom line and saying, we really are not going to step in here because we're enjoying a tidy profit. This is a chart that I didn't believe when I first saw it, but then when I looked up the tax forms, it is completely legit. This is $6.5 million that was deposited in overseas accounts by the American Board of Internal Medicine back in 2015. And you can be sure that if the ABIM is doing it, although it's the largest, some of the other boards are probably doing the same thing, because again, some of this money needs to be laundered somewhere, and what this money eventually is being spent on, Wes may have a better idea than me, but infuriating to say the least. So the ABIM reported a loss of 39.8 million on program and services in a 5-year period ending in 2013. Yet during that same time, they paid out 125.7 million to its senior officers and staff. And the psychiatry and neurology realm, the CEO made 3 million, while other officers were making in the range of $300,000 to $400,000 annually. Wes has a comment here. That's a nice chunk of change. Are they looking for new board members? Yeah. Here's one of those 990 forms that I was mentioning. There's 2 names highlighted here, Eric Hollenbo and Rebecca Lipner. Their names are highlighted because they're 2 of the people that churn out a lot of the publications in support of MOC. Oh, there's an update that's how much Dr. Lipner is making in 2014. So I can only imagine how much he's making now. So if you read here, this is something that was published in a peer-reviewed journal. In general, physicians who are board certified provide better patient care, albeit the results have modest effect sizes and are not unequivocal. Modest effect sizes and are not unequivocal. What does that even mean? How does this rubbish even get published? It's amazing to me. And then here's another one. This is an insert that the ABMS paid to actually have inserted into a journal. So they're actually paying to have their pro-MOC material published. Now, the NBPAS did a journal club where we hired 2 independent reviewers who really were pretty neutral on MOC to review the material. And they looked at 10 of the most heavily cited articles that the ABMS cites when they're trying to prove that MOC is effective. I'll just read this very quickly here. In reviewing the 10 manuscripts provided, I was struck by the limitations of the evidence base, specifically regarding the current implementation of MOC. Several of the studies are descriptive only, and even these illustrate the difficulties in execution of some of the MOC content. Some of the studies do not draw meaningful distinctions between initial certification and subsequent MOC. Additionally, the issue of grandfathering is not adequately addressed in the published literature. So again, a lot of the literature that's out there is in support of initial certification. That's not something I disagree with or NBPAS disagrees with. As all of you know, the knowledge that's acquired, the clinical experiences that are received during residency and fellowship can vary tremendously from program to program. So to have a single unified examination after completing formal training, most of us believe is reasonable. And really it should stop there when it comes to formal testing. Now, on the other side is this publication in JAMA, where they compared 2 groups, those that had lifetime certificates and non-lifetime certificates. And on 10 primary care performance measures, there was no difference between these 2 groups. So there's, in my opinion, better evidence that there's really no difference, that MOC really improves much of anything. So in terms of relevance, there's so many different examples, but I love this one for neurologists. When I'm lecturing to neurologists, I ask, does anybody know what this is? And there's crickets in the auditorium. And then I show this one and everyone jumps up and down saying that's an acoustic neuroma. So you guessed it, this is also an acoustic neuroma. Why is a neurologist being asked to identify pathological slides? I can assure you I've never taken a brain biopsy. I've never then taken said biopsy and looked at it under a microscope. And the examples go on and on and on. An adult anesthesiologist being quizzed on pediatric intubation technique, things that just really have no relevance to their current practice or specialty is being asked just for the sake of asking. Also, there's so much overlap. So this was an email I got saying that I need to comply with these patient safety measures, and the modules are being offered for free by the AAN, and I can participate, so on and so forth. But don't we already do these activities for JACO? I mean, for those of us that work in hospitals, we already do this stuff. So why is now the ABMS boards asking us to double dip and do the same thing again and pay to do the same thing again? So this is the old JACO logo on the left, the new JACO logo on the right. And the Joint Commission in Massachusetts, and I know many other states, actually refers to these 2 and Dr. Dizzle, whether it's recreational or medicinal. So, as far as I'm concerned, with my own personal advocacy, the ABPN didn't want to listen to a few diplomates. Pursuing action through large physician societies would have faced a lot of opposition, slow deliberation, probably nothing would have come of it. And many parties stood to benefit from MOC as they continue to do, so physicians need to be heard. Dr. Mass had a comment here. Try speaking to them in Spanish. I can teach you some bad words. Well done, Marion.
Greek, I know Greek.
Yeah, nice. So very quickly, I started my own petition. This was back in 2014, eventually garnering 1,100 signatures of neurologists. And again, not to end MOC or they can keep their money, basically just to get rid of Part 4, as some of the pediatricians on this call have been pushing for. And I sent out 9 letters with a growing number of signatures, and not once did I even get a response, not an email, not a phone call, nothing. And one of my colleagues made this, Paul Revere Matthew leads the charge, I mock your moke. And so over time, I looked at these signatures, and they were chairman of departments, chiefs of divisions. So there were some big time people taking notice of this. And eventually, one of my colleagues said, congratulations, you got Atlas to shrug. The American Academy of Neurology actually issued this statement saying, Part 4 is onerous. It really doesn't serve any purpose. We are asking you to get rid of it. The psychiatrist very shortly chimed in similarly saying, Part 4 is onerous. We really need to get rid of it. And of course, the ABPN, as the ABP to all of you, said, oh, we have no power to do this. We can't work independently without the ABMS approval. And of course, the ABMS doubled down saying something very similar. We're not changing anything, no matter how many diplomats sign your piece of paper. So to me, this was the tail wagging the dog, where really the organizations that are committed or supposed to be committed to serving us were now ordering us and telling us what to do and really not working in the best interest of the physicians or patients. And in case you're wondering how big the tail is that is wagging this dog, this is a slide that infuriates many people, as it should. The green is the growth of physicians between the 70s to 2015. And the brown orange here is the growth of middle management. So again, when people wonder where our healthcare dollars going, look no further than this graph. So if a system cannot be reformed, then it should be replaced. And if bureaucratic administrators are ruining the practice of medicine, then physicians should take action. So Dr. Singh, who we've heard from earlier, has a comment here. That sounds like a plan. Unfortunately, our administrator is on a conference call with some other administrators discussing the need for more administrators, so an administrator will be available in case I call. Yeah, fair enough. So that's when the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons really developed back in 2015, because we knew something had to happen, and nothing was going to happen if we just tried to change a system that refused to be changed. So many of you know the NBPAS basically recertifies physicians who have passed their initial ABMS or AOA certification examination. You need to have a valid license to practice medicine, 50 CME hours every 2 years in CME that's relevant to your specialty. And for selected specialties where there's procedures, hospital privileges, and that your privileges have not ever been revoked permanently. And the cost, although this is an old slide, it's up to 189, is it's about 73% cheaper than the ABMS. So Dr. Shah, I don't know if he's on the call. That's cheaper than a month of cable. Ugh, I forgot to DVR Dancing with the Stars. Very nice, Dr. Shah, my pediatric colleague. All right, so I was appointed to the board in 2014. As you can see, there are a number of different specialties represented on our board of directors. And again, we're all volunteer physicians, and there's a number of highly regarded institutions represented on the board as well. So just to be clear, these are just the specialties of the people that are on the board of directors. We recertify physicians in all specialties and all subspecialties that are offered by the ABMS. So it's a pro-physician movement. The more diplomats we have, the more leverage we'll have for acceptance. For many people, I tell them, listen, even if your ABMS certificate's not expiring anytime soon, there's no harm in being dual boarded. I've been dual boarded between the NBPAS and the ABPN since 2014. We also recertify DOs who have their initial board certification with the AOA. And for many of you who your hospital does not yet accept it, that'll probably change soon, but really think about being an NBPAS diplomat as almost like a PAC donation, where your dollars are paying for bringing the change that we're looking for all over the country. So this is Brain PAC. I've been on DC a couple of times pushing for different healthcare policies, and really a few people can make a difference. These are some publications that I've done, and I was interviewed on NPR. As you can see, there's some cardiology journals, psychiatry, even ophthalmology. So again, this is just to reinforce, this is not an isolated problem to any one specialty. This affects all of us. And it really should be a unifying issue for physicians everywhere of every specialty. This is a piece that I published in Practical Neurology talking about how MOC compliance contributes to physician burnout. And this has also appeared in the lay literature as well. Kurt Eichenwald, who's a award-winning journalist, wrote in Newsweek about MOC and really how it's such an ugly thing in the practice of medicine. They responded by attacking Kurt Eichenwald, saying that your wife is a pediatrician and you're very biased opinions, and this should be taken down. And as many of you know, the last thing anyone should do is pick a fight with the media, because the media is the one holding the microphone, the printing press, all these things. So they're always going to get the last word. So he went out and wrote a couple more pieces about this, further exposing just how bad it is. And Eichenwald quotes that, monopoly is not that there's an absence of competition, but the competition is so skewed in favor of one group here, the ABMS, that, it's really not a fair game. And the ABMS, after all this is one of the quotes on one of their websites: possession of a board certificate does not indicate total qualifications for practice privileges, nor does it imply exclusion of other physicians that are not so certified. Basically saying that you don't need to be board certified to practice medicine, but you need to be board certified to practice medicine. Many of you may know about this, but the ABMS tried to further secure their monopoly by having a backroom deal with the ACGME and saying that program directors of fellowships and residency programs need to be MOC compliant. As you can imagine, that infuriated the AOA and the program directors in this country who happen to be DOs. And the AOA filed litigation against the ABMS, saying that they are trying to push the AOA out of the competitive space. So they're further trying to secure a monopoly by even getting rid of the DO kind of counterpart in this whole recertification racket. Many of you have heard about the FSMB, their interstate compact. So basically with the rise of telehealth, it sounds like a great idea. Oh, great, I can sign up for the compact and then I can practice medicine across state lines. The Trojan horse here is that they define a physician as someone who's MOC compliant. So as you can imagine, if the compact grows big enough, who knows what's going to happen to state licensure, and then licensure might be tied to MOC, which will further make it difficult to get away from this. So think of it as a wolf in sheep's clothing. I want mutton to do with MOL. I'm sorry, the bad puns will just continue. So some people would regard this as a success. Many of the boards now, after the pressure of the public outcry, as well as I think NBPAS continuing to gain ground, are coming up with these MOC 2.0 programs. So for example, the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology, they have this article assessment pathway where you read these articles and then you answer these quizzes. So instead of a painful tenure exam, you now have quarterly, even more painful quizzes to take after reading these articles, which again, may or may not even be relevant to your specialty. The UCNS, which is another board that certifies neurologists in some other specialties, they decided to do the same thing. They're calling their program CCERT. The painful thing about the UCNS is they're not even recognizing people's expiration dates. So if I just sat my 10-year exam, they're basically turning around saying, yeah, that didn't count. You immediately have to start paying and participating in CCERT. So they're actually even worse than the ABMS in that way. At least they recognize people's expiration dates. And then this I found kind of laughable. I got this email basically saying that so few people were enrolling in CCERT that they are actually holding drawings for an Amazon gift card if you decide to recertify. So that's how desperate things have gotten. So as far as I'm concerned, why are we paying a tax to read articles and then answer quiz questions? That's most of us get journals. We'll read through some of them. We attend CME. We discuss cases with our colleagues. We look stuff up between patients. And then, of course, the passive learning you have when you see patients in practice. But again, none of this stuff is tabulated in a spreadsheet, and it's of no value to the boards. This quote really irritated me in particular. The adage of the wise old doctor who improves with experience is not true. Doctor skills tend to deteriorate after their formal training is over. And I'm sure most people on this call would be very upset, if you read this. And then, all these quizzes that they have after reading an article, how is this any more rigorous than the CME requirements of NBPAS? And if you look at the bottom of the slides, it says, what the F? I mean, control F. And what I mean by this is some of my colleagues who have actually done some of these CCERT programs, they will take the article and then they'll hit control F and then type in the keyword from the question, and it takes them right to the answer. So that really, it's such an easy endeavor that it's really not proving much of anything. So I'm going to fly through these. These are just some of the different state societies that have said, absolutely, we need an alternative, at least in neurology. So multiple state societies have kind of signed on to this. The AMA has passed multiple resolutions saying that board certification should not be a requirement to practice. Unfortunately, all they've done is pass these resolutions without really any actionable items. And then the state legislatures, there have been some successes. But again, getting them to actually be meaningful has been a challenge. Oklahoma was the first one. Texas had another one that was quite good. They basically vote, and this is an active law in Texas for anyone who practices in Texas, basically saying that a hospital cannot require maintenance or certification unless the entire medical staff, not a credentialing committee, not a group of executives, but the entire medical staff has to vote in favor of having MOC as a requirement to be on the medical staff. Now, the problem here is we tried to approach the Attorney General talking about this, but they said you have no standing in Texas. A physician needs to bring this up within the state of Texas. And so a couple of physicians who approached us, we said, would you like to be a plaintiff on this, and really approached the Attorney General and we'll back you up. And they said no. So if there's anybody interested in doing so, it would be great. And I think challenging an existing law is a far easier battle than trying to enact a new law. And again, this was signed into law by the governor some time ago. So I don't want to take up too much time, but the MOC bill in Massachusetts, the key sponsor was the Mass Medical Society. So when the organization that puts out the New England Journal of Medicine thinks this is a bad idea and shouldn't be required to practice medicine, it should hold some merit to everybody else who's paying attention. That's me testifying in November when I have my Movember mustache for prostate and testicular cancer awareness. And we have basically shifted our focus away from anti-MOC to pro-competition. Hospitals, insurance companies, all these stakeholders want to promote that their physicians are board certified, and we say that's fine. But you should be allowed a choice between the ABMS, the AOA, and the NBPAS. So this is the pro-competition language that we've been pushing more so recently. Here's some pictures from a New Hampshire bill that I was testifying on behalf of. Here's Virginia, and I know Suja Amir is on this call, so I am Suja Amir and I approve this message. Rhode Island, here's me with Senator Sheehan at the time, and Debbie McIntyre, who's also on this call. So I'm Debbie McIntyre and I approve this message. And so I'll just quickly go through some of the arguments that I've heard at some of these hearings. MOC is a voluntary process, as Wes said. It's not. If you want to get reimbursed, you have to comply. Public safety is at risk. MOC doesn't guard public safety. There's already many systems in place for public safety, including having to do CME, your annual or semi-annual meetings with your chair chief, the licensure process. And people who are MOC compliant also make mistakes. So it's not really guarding against public safety in any which way or form. You don't know what you don't know. How many people have attended CME courses and learned something new that they weren't expecting to learn? So there, you learned what you didn't know and you didn't know. So quizzing is not the only way to do this. Physicians need to know cutting edge advances in their field. I would say the 10-year exam did not include anything cutting edge at all, unless you think a butter knife is cutting edge. Cutting edge materials learned in CME courses and in articles, which is stuff that the good physicians read anyway. At one of these hearings, I heard this was actually the American Board of Pediatrics. There's a non-physician member, and she said, I go to Boston for the best care, but in an emergency, I have to rely on local doctors who are less competent. And I was happy to testify after her saying, hey, listen, that doctor you just slammed locally, number one, you're comparing them to the world's expert. And number two, that doctor is also MOC compliant. So you're really not proving anything and saying anything that MOC compliance is proving much. It's not that expensive. Well, we talked about costs already. You will lose your ACGME accreditation. As far as I know, some programs will require the program director to be MOC compliant, but not necessarily the faculty. The state need not get involved in what should be resolved internally by physicians. As Wes said, and Marion said, there's so many power brokers out there that getting the state involved is really the only way to cut through some of these weeds. The Department of Justice also spoke on this behalf and actually published a white paper saying that having a monopoly is bad for the healthcare markets. It really impairs innovation and really stunts growth of the market. So the Department of Justice encouraged state legislatures to take up this issue and consider pro-competition legislation. The ABMS, of course, poo-pooed on that, and I'm not going to read through the slide for you. The ACP also did mention a couple of concerns they had. Are you willing to give up your ABMS certificate and switch over to NBPAS? And my response to them is no, this is just an extension of your current certification. So it's an extension, not that you're forfeiting much of anything. Then I love this one. If you are named in a medical liability lawsuit, it'll look bad if you're not MOC compliant. And I would argue, I cannot think of a single lawsuit where, and I do some legal work on the side, where the boards showed up at the hearing saying, oh, he's board certified, so, we should dismiss this suit. It's nonsense. No piece of paper hanging on your wall is going to protect you when you are named in litigation. So what's the connection between MOC and insurance companies? Funny you should ask. So little known fact, Medicare and Medicaid do not require board certification or MOC. Many private payers do require MOC and they're contracted to do so. Therefore, they've turned to the hospitals and say, well, if we're required to require MOC, so are you. And it becomes kind of a trickle down. And so insurance companies are they follow the guidance of two organizations. There's the National Committee of Quality Assurance, or the NCQA, and they're about 90% of that market. And then URAC, or the Utilization Review Accreditation Commission. So NCQA and URAC in a nutshell basically tell the insurance companies, this is what you should require of your physicians. And then that trickles down to the hospitals and they say, this is what we require of you guys. So this is the really exciting news that I'm presenting today. In 2021, NBPAS officially met national accreditation standards for both NCQA and URAC. So many of our colleagues have approached their hospital credentialing committee and said, we want you to accept NBPAS. And they've been told, we would love to, but the insurance companies will not accept NBPAS. Now they can turn around and say, actually, insurance companies can and will accept NBPAS because NCQA and URAC says that NBPAS meets their standards. So again, there might be a little bit of back and forth, but the insurance companies, when they actually dig in and look at this, they will say, oh, that's right. Okay, that's fine. We'll accept NBPAS. And that's really the kind of back and forth conversation that needs to happen as more and more hospitals and more insurance companies decide that NBPAS is acceptable. We've also had the first telemedicine company come out and officially accept NBPAS. So if some of you are looking for telehealth work and are NBPAS diplomats, PlushCare might be a good employer for you. We've also had the first major healthcare plan accept. Geisinger Health Plan is now officially accepting NBPAS for recertification. Maximus, which is the largest Medicare Medicaid contractor in the US, is accepting NBPAS. And this is another big one. The Council for Affordable Quality Healthcare, or CAQH, which is one of the big databases which people turn to verify physician credentials, is also now having NBPAS in their pull down menu. So at this point, we have over 10,000 physicians and 147 hospitals and healthcare systems all saying yes to NBPAS. And of course, growing those numbers is really important. So our goals for 2022 is expansion into more of the commercial payer markets. And again, the floodgates are open now that URAC and NCQA are saying, yes, that's fine. Removing additional regulatory barriers that'll come with time. And this type of widespread acceptance is really going to completely change the recertification space. This is a copy of the official from guidance from the NCQA, and as you can see, NBPAS is listed by name in there, so that's always great to see. And equivalence, we are trying to move away from the term alternative. People would say, oh, NBPAS is the alternative board or it's the protest board. So I draw up this analogy. There's the AFC and the NFC in the NFL. There is the American and the NC National Conference and Major League Baseball. And likewise, with board certification, there should be the NBPAS and the American Board of Medical Specialties, where it's not an alternative, but an equivalent, and that physicians should certainly have a choice in which organization they use for recertification. So again, we think that initial certification is important. So, when I have debated, Chuck Cutler's in the room here, he's heard me debate with the ABMS CEO. One of the first things I do is thank the ABMS for the great job they've done over the years in terms of offering an initial certification examination. They should be proud of the service they offer, but they should also be content with that and not further encroach into the choices and finances of physicians. So I'll leave you with this analogy. So initial certifications, like buying a brand new car, you're very excited about it. Routine maintenance and oil changes should be CME, discussing cases with colleagues, so on and so forth. MOC and recertification, even though you own a car, you need to get a new car every 10 years. The lemon will cost you just as much, and it may not even work as well. And then the modules, although you own a car, you still need a bicycle every 10 years. The chain might be broken, the tires might be flat. You don't need it, but just pay for it anyway because we say so. So some rapid conclusions: MOC is expensive, time consuming, unproven in terms of evidence. One size does not fit all in terms of content. It reduces patient access to healthcare. As I said, people are taking time off. People are going to early retirement because of burnout. It increases the cost of healthcare delivery. It shouldn't be the only option for board recertification. We need more pro-competition bills and policies. Again, the fight to outlaw recertification as a requirement, I think, is going to be a failing proposition, because insurance companies and hospitals want to brag that their doctors are board certified, but we should be given a choice. And importantly, as we are going through so much in healthcare when it comes to diversity, inclusion, and equity, institutions have to walk the walk, talk the talk, and walk the walk. And when there is a group of physicians getting granted elite unjustified status, we need to speak up and say, that's not appropriate for so many reasons. But again, that's part of what we should be talking about. So what can you do in the audience? Become an NBPAS diplomate. After you become a diplomate, I strongly encourage you to put a DNBPAS, which stands for Diplomate of the National Board of Physicians and Surgeons. After your D or your MD, it'll look good on your business cards, your letterhead, your websites. Patients do love these extra letters after our names. But more importantly, it'll remind our colleagues and our institutions that, this is a legitimate thing, and more of us are deciding to go this way. I would also have you probably wear your lapel pin on your white coat or when you're at meetings, just to remind people that this is the real deal. And the biggest thing is people say, oh, that's great, but I wish my hospital accepted it. As much as I wish I could clone myself and go to every hospital, really, this is a grassroots movement, as Wes had said. And it's as simple as sometimes approaching your credentialing committee with some colleagues. On the NBPAS website, there's forms that you can, templated letters, petition forms, all these things. And really, that's just a great way to get the ball rolling. And you might be pleasantly surprised. I had a colleague who came to me and we had a long conversations. And then when I saw him a year and a half later, his 10 hospital system in Georgia was now accepting NBPAS because of his efforts to get that system to accept NBPAS. And again, the big things here that should be highlighted: it doesn't cost anything for the hospital. It increases patient access to healthcare, and the hospital will actually save money. Unfortunately, they don't want to hear the physician complaining about burnout and I don't have time for this and yada, yada, yada. But when you talk about dollars and cents in terms of it costing the hospital more money, and you talk about it impacting patient health, and you talk about it really being a divisive things in terms of it affecting minorities, women, and younger physicians more and more, that may garner more ears. So as I wrap up, I do encourage everybody, if you haven't already, to get vaccinated and get boosted. This is a meme that I use online, that it's a strong decision. And then I'm happy to take questions. There's a question from Dr. John Sharma here. Is board recertification going to affect non-physician providers? I hope this does not affect my acupuncturist. And so I'm happy to take questions. I'm going to leave this slide up just because it's a very wordy, detailed slide, but it basically sums up this entire lecture, just really comparing and contrasting ABMS and NBPAS. So again, thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions and have a great dialogue with everybody who's on today.
Paul, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. I think you're very funny. It's a dry sense of humor. I was like snickering the whole way through. And very informative, and I just hope it lays things out. People did have questions. I'll pull up the ones from the chat, and then when I'm finished, if you all want to start raising your hands, and if you wanted to ask directly, go to the bottom underneath reaction. I think you can raise your hand from there, and then if you have a direct question, we'll get to it. Diana Granita, a rheumatologist from California, and the founder of Direct Specialty. It's a group about direct pay care for specialists. Wonderful physician. We've actually met in person. She's fantastic and a real trailblazer. She was asking if NBPAS has a certification for rheumatologists, and I'm guessing you're going to say yes. Yes.
Yeah. So every specialty that's offered by the ABMS. So every IM specialty. So if you have a certificate, we will recertify you. One thing that's in this chart that I didn't go in any detail, one thing that we do that the ABMS doesn't do is we actually review everyone's certificates that are submitted to ensure that what you are submitting is relevant to the specialty or the subspecialty that you're seeking to recertify in.
No, fantastic. Someone pointed out, I think one of the pediatricians on the Zoom call pointed out that they had asked the vice president of mock certification, who had calls with many pediatricians this past week. They actually asked, how come the American Board of Pediatrics does not help and lobby against incursion of non-physician providers in medicine? And they were told that the American Board of Pediatrics cannot lobby. So I think that's just a point to make, because Wes certainly has some interesting numbers that are telling us that there's lobbying that has been going on by some of these boards. It's just amazing. Like, I don't know, is it worse to cheat, lie, steal? I think it would be worse to do all three. But anyway, just a
Yeah,
comment.
and I actually had a question, Marion, for you and Wes. If you look in your crystal balls, do you see a situation where the ABMS says, you know what, there's so many NPs and PAs now, we're going to start board certifying these people too?
Well, sure. It'll be
Absolutely.
money grab for them.
They're doing the same thing with veterinarians too. So don't kid yourself, but this is a big moneymaker.
Oh, so it'll be raining cats and dogs, sure enough.
Precisely.
Yes. So I also want to point out, in the chat, Dr. Christina Dewey, who's on here, did a great blog post about this whole topic. It's a great thing to read, and it's a great thing to go to her Twitter page and to retweet it. Someone asked if the portion about NBPAS being accepted by insurance, I guess you pointed out the problems with that. Someone asked a good question, I believe it was Dr. Thornley, if they do outpatient medicine and they're not in a hospital, then does it matter? Do they still need to get it approved by their hospital?
No, I mean, if you're 100% outpatient, it could be just a matter of reaching out to your major payers and saying, hey, listen, I'm currently dual certified, but I'm board certified with NBPAS. It serves as primary source verification. So for those of you who have ever filled out a driver's license form or a passport, they'll ask for one item from column A or 10 items from column B. So primary source verification basically means it's that one item from column A. And as you know, administrators and bureaucrats love when their job is easier. So the fact that both NBPAS and ABMS are considered primary source verification, then that's a huge word. That's like their big keyword. And if you tell them that NBPAS meets that criteria, they'll say, oh, great, that's fine. Send us your certificate. We're more than happy to accept it.
One thing I'll add is sometimes, like hospitals, even if you're outpatient in a community, not doing anything in a hospital, they'll still require you to, be on staff, courtesy staff at the hospital, and then they still require it. I ran into that problem when I tried with our local hospital. So I think that was all that I had. Was there anyone that wanted to ask a question?
I was going to say, I love hearing Marion's voice, but I also love when people actually unmute themselves, come onto video and ask the questions themselves.
So Paul, you had went to the Vision Commission and testified before them, and they were giving you a hard time about mid-levels, and I forget exactly the details, but weren't they giving you a hard time about it? It seems like the Vision Commission and the ABMS, their next project would be to try to certify mid-levels. Just based on what's happening with the APA, for example, they're really trying to get people to be supportive of mid-levels. They've taken away the titles in all the lecture series for the physicians so that it's just, Debbie McIntyre instead of Debbie McIntyre, MD. So I really believe that that's the next step. But again, it makes no sense when we're required to step through, 6 extra years compared to at least 6 extra years. So I just wanted to recall that incident that happened at the Vision Commission for you.
So thank you, Debbie. And for those of you that don't know, so the Vision Commission was this meeting that was held with stakeholders from insurance companies, hospital associations, you name it, everybody was there. And the meeting actually went really well. And they drafted a report with some really good recommendations. And of course, those recommendations were filed and never acted upon. So they did all that legwork basically as a public relations event and really didn't do much of anything about it. So to Debbie's point, when I was testifying on behalf of NBPAS, I talked about a lot of the problems that we have. I did mention the difference in training between NPs and NDs and a lot of the things you just mentioned. And one of the board members of the ABMS is an NP who very quickly in an angry tone said, oh, we do a lot of training and we need to maintain certifications, and went on and on and on. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think we're going to see more and more of that. I wish I had a good solution for you in terms of what's going to stifle, the number of independent practice bills that are popping up all over the country. I mean, for me, it's terrifying that somebody could shadow me for 6 months, and then go out on their own and claim to be a internal medicine, neurology nurse practitioner and see patients independently. It's just very, very scary. And some of the cavalier attitudes I see online, oh, I currently work with this cardiothoracic surgeon. I could just do 2 years of a fellowship and do his job easily. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we're hearing. And so really the way I think this is going to end is, number one, the trial lawyers might salivate on this, and you might see a number of malpractice lawsuits, and malpractice for the NPs and PAs who are trying to be independent may be so high that they may not be able to survive. A lot of them are asking for pay parity, which is a double-edged sword, because if there's pay parity with physicians, who in their right mind would hire an NP or PA if you could hire a physician at the same price? So they might be pricing themselves out of the market. And then I would say the third piece, which I don't have the time to go into in much detail, is the concept of PGL licensure. Many of you know that for 30,000 residency slots, there were 40,000 applicants. So 10,000 people who graduate from medical school, who are, in my opinion, receive more training than someone fresh out of PA or NP school, can't get a job. And it's absolutely ridiculous. So something I'm pushing, and many of you probably have seen it on the websites, is this thing called a PGL, or postgraduate license. So this is a DO or an MD who's passed their steps, has graduated from medical school, has not secured a residency, and now can work under a fully licensed DO or MD as a MD PGL or a DO PGL. The nice thing here is they would get a year of experience, they'd make some money, and then reapply for the match. There are some people who would just never match, or love the practice they're in and say, you know what, I love where I'm at. I'm just going to stay in this position and every year have an incremental raise. And it might be something they do for the rest of their life. It might be a nice part-time thing for them to do where they can use their education, and residency just isn't for everybody, or there aren't enough slots for everybody. And again, this would cost nothing, as opposed to the ideal solution of getting more residency slots, which again, money. And that's the big limiting factor. And many of you know there's a plan to expand the number of residency slots by 2,000, which is, I think, over the next 5 years or 10 years or something like that. But that's a far cry from the number of doctors we actually need to address the physician shortage.
In a scary move, there's actually some private equity groups that are pushing for residencies for non-physician providers in the emergency room field.
So it's funny you say that, Marion, because we can actually harness that energy. If you tell a private equity firm, hey, listen, I'm planning on going to this rural area that's underserved. I want you guys to finance this clinic. Me and a couple of attendings are going to be there, and there's going to be 10 PGL positions. They'll say, sure, we will spend less money hiring PGLs to work with you. We'll be furthering their education. We'll be serving these people. And then these PGLs might have a foot to get into a residency, or like I said, they may just say, you know, we love this practice, we're going to stay here. So, I mean, I think that's one way we could harness the negative energy of a venture capital company and actually put it to good use.
That's very smart. All right, we do.
You have your mouth covered. I'm not sure whether you want to say something. You're still disgusted by everything I just said.
Are you talking about me?
Yes, I am.
No, I'm just sitting here because, I mean, the scope of practice fight in Texas just occurred over this last session, and it was like swatting fly left and right. And, you know, obviously we have to win every time. They win once, they are able to practice independently. I was, just to follow up to what you guys were discussing, when I was speaking with that VP of credentialing at the Board of Pediatrics, it was really kind of interesting because I did bring this up, that I felt like this was a very unfair issue, that pediatricians are being held to these standards and there's non-physician practitioners who are not held to any standards, and was lectured on the idea that they are actually forming their own boards and that they are going to, they're where medicine was, what did he say, in the 1930s. To which my reply was, but medical education is standardized to begin with. After the Flexner report, medical schools have to have a certain standard of education to even graduate somebody with an MD or a DO. And he was like, yeah, well, I have confidence that the AANT and the boards are working on it. It completely floored me, because at that point I realized they're not lobbying for us because they can't. I suspect they're not lobbying for us because it's not going to be in their best interest in the long term to do that. They are seeing a ship sailing and they're jumping on board as opposed to helping. And I was really, that actually really upset me. I mean, because I know that pediatricians, for a fact, even in Texas, with supervision laws, are being replaced by non-physicians. And you know, to me, we've had deaths. We've had kids die. My fight has always been for patients. You know, whether people come see me is irrelevant, but I think when you talk about somebody else's child, they deserve the best. That's what the parents are expecting, and now we don't have that transparency. But I did have a question, so that's what I raised my hand for. Do you have a pathway or some advice for folks who want to present NBPAS to their hospitals and institutions, those of us who are employed, that has been successful? Do you have any resource that some of us could follow that could help us with presenting this to like our credentialing committees to have these discussions?
Yeah, so on the NBPS website, as I mentioned, there are templates for petitions, for letters that you could literally plug in the name of your MEC committee and send it to them. Also, petitions are very useful. You kind of raising notice by yourself is one thing. If you have 100 members of the medical staff all saying, yes, we think this should be the case, absolutely. And then as mentioned, in Texas, there's already a law in the books. And all it takes is someone to say, hey, listen, we're going to mention this to the AG if you don't want to act on this. And that will very quickly probably turn to the hospital attorneys, and they'll say, yeah, we're probably better off just complying with this instead of sending smoke signals and having other people coming in and investigating this.
No, well, I found the white paper on the Texas Medical Association website today, and I'm stunned because there is absolutely no discussion of this within the hospitals. I mean, I know the chiefs of staffs of all our systems out here. I texted everybody this morning. Nobody knows this law exists. Nobody even knows this is that we can vote as House staff to stop doing MOC. It's the best kept secret, and I can't believe that it was fought for and actually passed, and none of us even knows about it. It's unbelievable.
Oh, one thing I wanted to mention, which may not surprise people, I don't know this for a fact, but I was told in one of the states where they're trying to advance a bill to help medical school graduates who have not secured a residency to practice in some way under a physician. Apparently the nurse practitioners were fighting that bill because they knew that would be such a huge competition for them. So Suja Amir, you've been unusually quiet. I'd like to know if you have any questions or comments.
I don't have any comments, or questions, but, I would love to see, the pediatricians make this the tipping point for everybody. I mean, I know that, a lot of us have been doing this for a long time, and what I'm seeing here in Virginia, so many physicians that kept quiet about, well, I shouldn't say they kept quiet. I think a lot of people were ticked off about MOC for a long time, but didn't feel like they had any power. What I'm seeing is the bills that are, because I got a call about MOC, the pediatricians being upset about MOC, and then the week later, I started getting calls from out of state, from in-state about the NP bills that are going on right now, and it is horrible. They don't know what to do. If you see some of these committee meetings, you would be floored. Our medical society, unfortunately, has basically left the physicians high and dry. And I don't know what to tell physicians other than, you've got until crossover, which is February 15th. And you could, I'm going to try and help them fight it. But the arguments that are being made are really, really poor by the medical society. And, it's more than likely going to pass that you're going to have optometrists being called doctors. You're going to have, nurse practitioners practicing, without, any oversight. It's just really, really bad. And, I'm not sure if, I don't want to be negative, but it's like, what else can we do? Right. And we've been doing this with MOC for 3 years, with the help of Dr. Matthew. And, we've had legislators, Sam Rasool, that's been really active in trying to help, support this. But I don't know what, I mean, you know, I don't know what else we can do, right? And so I just hope that people recognize that, you know, the importance of getting physicians organized to advocate, because people don't really understand. I'm not a physician, okay? And when I go up to a legislator, it's like nothing. When one physician walks up to a legislator, the response is completely different. And I don't think people understand how powerful one physician can be. And I don't think physicians recognize their power. I don't think physicians recognize that if you all really stood together on this issue, that you could make such a difference. And the power of physicians are so important. And it's been very difficult to get you all to come together on this. And so if you can just get this unified on this issue, you guys, it would be very easy to defeat this and just really, you know, you would need to have, you would need to have to worry about this. I mean, I can't stress that enough. So please figure out a way to do that. So that's all I have to say.
Suja, I want to thank you. I mean, Suja has been just a warrior in this space. We've met personally. She came to the original opening of PPA at the Library of Congress in 2017. It's one of my favorite treasured pictures from the day, is getting to hug her that day, and I have a great photo of it. I know Ellen Theophilopoulos has her hand raised, Dr. Theophilopoulos and Christina Dewey. I've asked you both to unmute. I think you have to press the button and you'll ask next. But while you're doing that, I guess I just want to comment. I have to say, I always think about motive. And when we say like our boards and our associations don't seem to be fighting scope and they don't seem to be fighting mock, and that sometimes the state medical societies, like you're pointing out in Virginia's not seeming like they're up to snuff, kind of makes me wonder, is it just sort of this old boys network where there's people that are part of the ABP or the ABIM, and there's people that are part of the associations, and they figure, well, if scope of practice passes, then I'm going to have a whole bunch of new candidates here and we can make a new kind of certification. We have a new revenue stream if we lose the other one. Is that really what's going on? I don't know. I just kind of think about motives sometimes.
I think it's a little more sinister than that personally. So the in Rhode Island, for example, the Rhode Island Medical Society, they said that they would support our bill, but behind the scenes they're not supporting our bill. The main doctor, Dr. Migliore, who is an ophthalmologist who is grandfathered out of the program, was offered a position to create his own subboard of ophthalmology plastics with the ABMS and the ABO. One of his children, I guess, is a PA, and so they helped to pass the PA independence law here in Rhode Island, so they can practice nearly independently in Rhode Island. So, I mean, not only is he fighting us, and he's forming this other thing, but he also is passing the PA independence bill. And I really believe that there's probably, just like the Vision Commission, they're making tons of money or expecting to make tons of money. And if they can get rid of physicians or make money while they're getting rid of physicians, they're expecting to save, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars by hiring mid-levels who are lesser trained and put the onus of any kind of problems on the physicians. I really believe that unfortunately that there seems to be a concerted effort to get rid of physicians. And just like in psychiatry, we have a shortage of psychiatrists, but the ABPN fails 25% of physicians every year for newly graduating physicians with their board certification, and at least 5 to 10% with the MOC. So, you know, to make it harder and harder to have access to physicians and psychiatrists, the only reason would be, from my perspective, to usher in these mid-level providers.
Very well could be. Dr. Dewey, did you want to say something? I think you have to press I asked you to.
Yeah.
And then
So,
next, Dr. Theophilopoulos.
hi, Christina Dewey. So I just wrote a blog yesterday that encompasses a lot of this. And part of the reason that makes me so just upset with this whole thing is I certified in pediatrics and underwent initial board certification in 2002, pre-MOC. I was literally sitting at one of the initial introduction lectures at a conference from the American Board of Pediatrics, where it was announced as voluntary. It was voluntary, and even if you're grandfathered in, you can or maybe not participate. but it was up to the physician. And what's really interesting is when I was writing this blog, I looked up on the American Board of Pediatrics website, and it actually talks about the history, and I put it in the chat, but it actually says the American Board of Pediatrics, ABP, was founded in 1933 to raise standards of pediatric care and help bring clarity and order to a time period when anyone could say they were a pediatrician without completing any requirements at all. Does that sound familiar to anybody right now? Like the irony, almost 100 years later is, yeah. And then it also goes on to say the ADP found its purpose as physicians began to recognize the need for standards of training and care. And somehow, 89 years later, we're right back where we started. The boards aren't doing anything except taking our money. And they're not actually doing what they were initially formed and set out to do. So I joined NBPAS or became the certified diplomat like in December. I will certainly try and go ahead and point it out or, present it to our hospitals. But I think it's really, really important for all physicians to understand this, and that the whole reason the boards were formed initially was to protect patients. They've lost sight of their main purpose. And I think it's up to us to kind of talk about it and let everybody know. So
it's interesting that I posted in there, there's a New York article Times that talks about one of the first African-American physicians who is a pediatrician had to sue the American Board of Pediatricians in order to become board certified. So he won that suit, I guess, and was allowed to become a member, because in order to become a member of the board, he had to be a part of the AMA, and the AMA didn't allow African-American physicians at that time. What's interesting to me is that the number of African-American physicians, and especially male African-American physicians, has not gone up, but has gone down since this whole process. And if you look at the report from Flexner, also, we all talk about the Flexner report, but if you actually look at the report, it is very racist and extremely sexist. And he essentially recommended that they close a lot of the schools that had, women physicians and that had African-American physicians. There was only like 2 schools that they let to have African-American physicians. But if it is beyond the normal discussion of racism. If you actually read the report, it is really horrible. And so I really believe that there is this underlying, not only is this current MOC appeared to be discriminatory, but there's been this whole history for a long time, including in psychiatry, and from the beginning of the American Board of Pediatricians, where they wouldn't allow African Americans in until they sued them. So I think that it's just helpful to point out the historical context.
It always matters. Dr. Theophilopoulos, I don't know if I say that right. I believe you are a pediatrician in Florida.
Yeah, I'm a pediatrician and I'm also an attorney in the state of Florida. And so sort of, where are we going with all of this? And sort of like there was sort of in Tort 101 when I had my probably one of the first classes in tort law in my first year. The attorney that was teaching the class, very, very good attorney, had a kind of extreme opinions, but still was a good attorney, stated, what's the purpose of tort law? Because if the legislation did their job, you wouldn't need tort law. If there was a law for everything that, to protect everybody, then theoretically tort law wouldn't be needed. But tort law is needed because it becomes a safety net where legislation falls short. So clearly legislation is falling short in terms of patient safety. We're allowing a lot of scope creep there. Every state's allowing it to some degree. I don't know any state that has just had a hard no on it anymore. I can't even really keep track. And so what we're seeing, and it's starting to evolve, and I've had some attorneys reach out to me, and for the record, I will say that I am not actively being paid to help anybody on any cases, because right now with my job, it would be considered a conflict of interest. Where I go with this, just seeing what I'm seeing and seeing how outrageous this is, and knowing that at some point I might be a patient and not able to speak for myself. And it breaks my heart that my daughter's a third-year medical student at the top of her class and wants to do peds. And I tried very hard to talk her out of it, which is a shame. You know, she wants to follow my footsteps, and I tried so hard to discourage her, but you know, she wants to do what her mom did. She loves it. She loves children. But so anyways, I think tort law is going to have to come in and pick up the slack. And what attorneys have reached out to me, and you know, there are a handful of cases, and they're just sort of jaw drop. They're like, what do you mean they're not a doctor? What do you mean a physician didn't see them? Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like saying, well, a paralegal is going to go litigate a murder case. They would say, you know, heck no. And that's a nice way of putting it. So I think this is where it's going to have to really be brought to the front. Unfortunately, it's going to be tort law, and it's going to be bloodshed. There's a lot of sharks in the water. And one of the things that I think is making it hard, and I can speak for the state of Florida, is that there's a lot of tort law reform. So we made it difficult to get sued as physicians. So a lot of attorneys are turning down a lot of cases that are obviously egregious. And I've had a couple cases come my way, and my friends that are attorneys said, well, you look at these, can you tell me if you think there's, you know, a lawsuit? I'm looking at this one, and this, you know, without disclosing too much information, the woman came into the ER and never saw a physician, was sent home. She was in an accident, sent home, and died overnight. So you guys could do the math. I'm not going to say much more than that, but I called him and I said, okay, well, I wrote this 15-page paper when I was getting my master's of health administration. That was during COVID because I needed to make lemonade out of my lemons. And I wrote this 15-page paper about liability. And because most physicians, a lot of physicians and most mid-levels are employed, there's a lot of vicarious liability here. You've got vicarious liability, you've got negligent hiring, you've got negligent supervision, you've got negligent retention, you have all these causes of liability. And if any of you are familiar with the Ochoa case, that was why the parent company ended up paying $6 million. So they're going to go for the jugular. When these attorneys realize what's happening, they're going to go for the jugular. And I will tell you, the attorneys will tell me the biggest this guy ended up taking the case, and he's pursuing this lawsuit, the one that I referenced. And I said, this nurse practitioner got his degree online down in South Florida and had 4 years of being an ER nurse. And I don't really care if he had 20 years. I'm so sick of hearing about that. Oh, well, as long as you're a nurse for 10 years, no, it doesn't make a difference. But so he's going for the jugular. He's going after the ER group that employs him. He's going after the hospital that gives in the privileges. He's going after the hospital for allowing policies where a physician doesn't lay eyes on a patient. And he's going after the physician too, unfortunately. But, I explained to him, please keep in mind that physician is an employee and probably forced to sign off on these NPs. So he's, I said that person could actually end up being a witness for you. But anyways, there's a lot of that going on. It's going to become rampant. The one thing we as physicians need to do is be a little bit, they don't think they can afford the expert witnesses. And I will tell you, it can cost up to $100,000 to litigate a case. And juries do rule in favor for physicians 2/3 of the time. So they're, believe it or not, they are gun shy because of the cost of litigating. I'm not defending attorneys. And I will tell you, when I went to law school, I only liked 20% attorneys. When I graduated from law school, I still only like 20% of attorneys. But something's got to change. And I think tort law is going to end up cleaning up the mess. I hope. I hope. I had a lot of questions, and I think they've sort of gone by the wayside, but a couple of the questions from the lecture were, how do you get around some of the statutes in different states that define board certification, looking at and referencing the American Board of Medical, the ABMS. How do you get around statutes where they're talking about MOC? How are you going to get around that with this current organization, which I think is amazing? And I've threatened, I have a partner on this call that knows I've talked about we need to just break off and have our own board of pediatrics to compete with the ABS. But how, and that can certainly be a subsidiary of the existing organization that you have. And the other question I have about MOC is maintenance certification. Is there a copyright on that? Is there a reason why you can't say what we're doing is a maintenance certification? As far as I know, there's no copyright on that. So maybe I'm wrong. And then just a couple more commentaries as far as, you know, where do we go? Are we just going to rely on tort lawyers to just sue the heck out of NPs and allow people to die and you know, overutilize medicine? But a lot of states, probably half of the states in the United States, have citizens initiatives. We could collectively be writing citizen initiatives in the state of Florida. They're through the amendments. They supersede law because it's a part of the Constitution, Florida Constitution. We could be writing our own Transparency Act. We could be writing our own, you know, that if somebody holds themselves out to be a physician or should have known that that patient thought they were a physician, they will be held to that standard. Therefore, they can be, they can be held to the standard of a physician, and a pediatrician can testify against them, that kind of thing. So about half of the states do that. And I think if we had a working group to write these initiatives and push them forward, I mean, you get the support of the people. People want to get what they paid for. They don't go to the ER, pay, $10,000 and never even see a physician. That's ridiculous. So, you're going to have the support of the people, I think. And that's all you need to get a citizen initiative passed, is support. And you will have support of the people. So just a comment there too, is I think that is a place to start as well. Okay, I'm going to stop because I'm just blubbering now. And I appreciate your attention.
No, that was all great. You had so many fantastic points. I will just comment on a few of them. First of all, there's no state in the country where your licensure is tied to board certification. So, some of the laws, we call them weak bills that have been passed, have said, oh, you can't require board certification for licensure. Well, thank you for reinventing the wheel. I guess it's good to have it in print somewhere, but that has yet to be the case. The other thing is that's a very interesting question. Can we use the term MOC? It's a term that has so much animosity that I don't think anybody has ever even thought about it, but it would be fascinating if we did start doing it and if it wasn't trademarked, and then we kind of slid in where there are these vague policies of physicians need to be MOC compliant. Well, they're compliant with our MOC. So that's an interesting point. I'll bring that back to the board. And then one other interesting point that you brought up, among many interesting points, was the whole idea of, do we need the ABMS for initial certification? There's been some conversation among some specialty societies of, hey, why don't we just make our own exam? So I can speak for neurology. So the American Academy of Neurology makes the right exam, the residency in-service training exam. And every resident sits that exam every year that they're in residency. So I've actually suggested, hey, listen, for neurology residency, it's 3 years. You get 3 strikes to take that exam. And if you pass it, great, you don't have to sit an exam later paid by the ABMS. And so I think that would be great. It would really motivate residents and fellows to actually take the exam more seriously. It'd probably improve their learning, knowing that they wouldn't have to deal with this standardized exam later after completing residency or fellowship. They'd save money, they'd save effort. And the other thing that I've thrown out there is, if a specialty society, let's say the American Academy of Pediatrics, said, you know what, we're done with the ABP, we want to write our own exam, we want to partner with the NBPAS, so we'll write the exam, we'll issue the exam, and then NBPAS, which is this nationally accredited organization, can actually get our results and then issue that certification and then continue to monitor that they're doing ongoing CME. I think that'd be a great system. But again, that would require the specialty society to realize, this is the right thing to do for our membership. It's cost savings, it's better education. NBPAS is a well-established organization. So I think as URAC and NCQA have come into the fold, I think more and more private payers, I think JACO at some point is probably going to come into the fold as well. And as you see more and more of these acronyms following the NBPAS train, I think you're going to slowly see more and more physician societies saying we should partner with them, or at the very least be enablers, right? Where they don't get in our way, but rather are permissive.
Well, I mean, in wrapping up, because I don't see any more hands up, but if someone does want to raise, go right ahead. But I guess I would say, like, as a pathway forward, I think especially if you're at an independent hospital or a non-academic hospital, because I would bet my boots it would be easier to get it done there. But to lobby and push, go to the NBPAS website, lobby and push, and get the information there so that they have a toolkit that you can advocate for your hospital to accept NBPAS. So they're making it easy for you.
So, and to boot, Marion does have very expensive boots, but in addition to her comment, I would also say that not only will you be serving your own interests, you'll be serving the interests of all of your colleagues at that hospital, but oftentimes there will be regional dominoes as well. While our competitor down the street now accepts NBPAS, that's very good for physician recruitment and retention. We should do the same thing. So you will oftentimes see these regional dominoes falling. When one hospital does it, the other hospitals say, hey, me too. And that's oftentimes a question that you'll get from your medical executive committee. What other hospitals in the region or the state accept NBPAS? It's always tough to be number one, but when you're number 5, it's not so much of a big plunge, and you'll see more and more hospitals deciding to go that way. So a little effort on your part can have a huge impact.
Other things, our lawsuit is still alive and well. And, Ellen, I do agree with you, like, unfortunately, litigation is sometimes the way to go. So after this, when we put out a blog or when we give some updates on this, we'll be providing the PPA GoFundMe so that we can continue our efforts there as well. And I'm going to call an end for this, but
Marion, sorry. I did want to hear if Chuck Cutler had anything to say.
Oh, no, super. Go ahead.
He took the time to join us, and he's someone I admire very much. So I'd be remiss not to ask if he didn't have anything to say.
Thanks, Paul. No, great presentation, and I agree with everything that you've said, and some wonderfully supportive comments and great ideas. So I hope we can move forward. Thanks for the opportunity to chime in.
And you know what, and thank you for that, Chuck. But I will say one other quick thing, and this is probably more so for the people that are at large academic institutions. Some of the pushback that I've gotten at Harvard is, well, CME is not enough. And so I did this survey study, basically asking physicians, hey, listen, in a 5-year CME cycle, would you be opposed to taking a board exam review course? So basically like an updates course in your specialty. And 99% of the people I surveyed said, sure, I'd be happy to take a neurology updates course, a CME course once every 5 years, if that was evidence that I'm kind of keeping up to speed. So basically the other 4 years of the cycle, you do whatever wild card CME you want that's relevant to your interest or your practice, but once every 5 years, you would do this board style review course. It got a lot of interest because, again, the medical school where you are affiliated would have this huge boon in attendance in their CME courses. And so it would benefit the medical school, it would benefit the learners, and people would probably walk out of there saying, oh, good, now I feel like I'm a headache specialist. I would have no problems learning a little bit about some of the new stuff in MS, some of the new stuff in epilepsy. I would have no problems with that. And if that was the stamp that my department wanted to say, yep, he's kind of up to speed with neurology, that's good enough for us. That could be an interdepartmental thing. If you're at a medical institution where they're saying, well, CME is not enough, that might be a little caveat you can carve in and get the medical school on board.
Can I say something about CME real quick? You mentioned that, and it irritated me because that was one of the arguments that ABMS made. They had 2 attorneys, come to Virginia, and every year that was an argument. But they said they take CME in bedside manner. That was the argument every time. And so I just want you all to know that these are the types of things that they say, and it's really aggravating because you all know that that's not what the type of CME that you're taking. But that is how they, that's the argument they make, that you guys are somehow taking some like easy little CME, and that's how you pass the time for the licensure. So just keep that in mind.
No, and Suja, that's exactly the point why I did this survey study, and I presented to them saying, listen, if you're concerned about the quality of the CME, listen, we're going to be attending the Harvard Neurology Updates course. If you can find better quality CME anywhere, good luck. And I'm not trying to toot the Harvard horn, but I told them, listen, wouldn't you rather see that money going back to the medical school than going to this, cash swelled organization that's just kind of running the show and just collecting money hand over fist. I'd rather see that money going to the medical school. I'd rather see that money propping up our own faculty who are running these courses. So, I mean, for so many reasons, it's a win-win. So Suja and anybody else on the call, if you do get that argument from your institution, just pitch your own medical school and say, hey, each department could have this carve out of, we'll accept NBPAS, but once in a 5-year cycle within this department, you need to do the updates course with our medical school. You would have, you're going to get so many people saying this is a great idea for so many reasons.
Mark LaPatton had his hand up. I didn't notice that before.
Yeah, the other issue with CME that gets raised by ABIM, and they have made this direct statement to me, is how do we know that physicians go to a CMA conference, sign in, and then spend an hour going to the beach, and they got the credit and they didn't really learn? And what this reflects is two things. One, it reflects an inherent distrust in physicians, which runs rampant against amongst ABIM. I'll speak specifically for ABIM. The other thing is it's a calculated, intentional move to discredit physicians as a way to promote themselves a little bit further. It's a bogus argument, but it's one they make repeatedly, that we cannot rely on CME because physicians don't know what they don't know, and physicians don't know what CME they need, and they won't go to the CME conference anyway. It's, they're bolstering their position as enforcers of the medical profession rather than educators of the medical profession.
No, thank you, Mark. That's spot on.
No, super. And then also, Paul, I'm really glad you had Chuck say something. He's been a hero in this fight, as has Wes, as has Mark, as has Suja, as has Debbie, as have many of you. But also we have Meg Edison on here, and I think she's unmuted. And I didn't want you to be misogynistic, Paul, and not call on Chuck and not call on Meg. So.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. No, this is great. I actually think this is probably ramping up a little bit. There's been a lot more discussion. There's been some changes with ABP on their part 4. This kind of got a lot of pediatricians ramped up. I actually had 3 phone calls from different people last week about MOC, and I haven't heard about it for a year. So excited to get back in the fight.
I'll text you what happened, Meg. It's oodles of fun.
Yeah, well, I have a website a long time ago, our Peds for MOC Reform website, Marion, that we started a long time ago with a petition. I haven't had, those signatures will trickle in, but then I got something like 500 signatures in the last 2 weeks. So that's crazy.
Yeah, it's great stuff. All right, was there anyone else? Ellen, is your hand raised again, or is that from before?
No, I didn't mean to raise it again. So sorry about that. I don't know, but I just, since I have the floor again, one more thing is that how are we getting around all these IRB requirements? Some of the MOC were collecting clinical data, and how in the world is the ABP getting around that? And what are they doing with this data when I am doing an MOC that is collecting data on my patients? Because last I checked, everything needs an IRB approval when we're doing research on patients. So anyways, even if it's a survey. So I wondered how they get around this, and that would be an argument to say this process isn't out of compliance with IRBs in a variety of institutions. So I've always wondered about that, and certainly what you were talking about, Paul, with having in the 5 years, one of those 5 years you have to do a board, a review course. That is maintenance certification. I don't know why they don't own that. And I would throw that right into your descriptions, that this is our maintenance certification, and this is how we think physicians can best maintain their own board certification.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be something it would be something we'd require, but if your home institution wanted that as an extra layer of, okay, now
I'm just saying, whatever you decide to do, this is how you expect physicians to maintain their certification. And we believe that there's, most people have an ethical standard and are going to do what they say they're doing with their continuing medical education. And the more I think about it, the more I feel strongly they don't own the MOC title. Just like nurses calling themselves board certified and, fixing hangnails, they don't own it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably be thinking about all this when I'm enjoying a drink during a CME conference on the beach with Mark.
But I think you bring up a good point with the IRB. I know they're getting away with it, but what they're doing is they're taking our physician data and I believe lateralizing it to the patient data, and they have a great little data collection set that they can then tell. And it's very interesting. I don't know if you remember when we talked about Christine Castle, the former president of the ABIM, and then she had been on multiple other boards. She was also on the board of the big group purchasing organization Premier, who serves as a data collector, and they're the ones who collect our mock data. Amazing how that happened. That's why you have to pay attention to conflicts of interest and who's who. All right, well, this was phenomenal. Can I call an end to it and press the stop recording button? And